The Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Meeting is called to order. I am Dr. Pam Anglin from Paris Junior College, serving as chair. Please be advised that this meeting is being broadcast over the internet and recorded, so I would ask all attendees to silence your cell phones. For those attending via teleconference, please mute your phone until you are ready to speak. This prevents background noise. Thank you. We have a full agenda for this meeting, so let's begin by calling the roll. Mr. Gilmore, will you please call the roll?
Ms. Crawford?
Here.
Here. Dr. Maldonado, are you on the phone? Dr. Maldonado, are you on the phone?
This is Julie Eklund. I just came in.
Okay.
Sorry.
Dr. Wallace, you're on the phone, right?
Yes, sir, I am on the phone.
Thank you. Mr. Lee? Mr. Cervantes?
Here. Present.
Ms. Wickland?
Yes, present.
Mr. Reeser?
Here.
And Mr. Yiannopoulos, I believe, will be absent. Dr. Isaac?
Sir.
Ms. Anglin?
Here.
Dr. Rhodes?
Here.
Dr. McMillan?
Here.
Is Ms. Elizondo on the phone? I'm right here. Ah, she did. Sorry, you snuck in on me. Thank you. All righty.
We have a quorum. As a reminder, members on the call are permitted to vote. Item 2 is consideration and approval of the minutes from August 19th, 2019 meeting. The draft minutes were included in the meeting materials. Do members have comments, questions, or corrections to the draft minutes?
Move approval.
Okay. We have a motion by Dr. McMillan for approval. Do we have a second? Second by Ms. Crawford. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Thank you. Item 3 is discussion, review, and consideration of the Commissioner's 2022 to 2023 biennium charges. We'll start with Charge 1, which is study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding levels for the contact hour, core, and the student success funding. We have no recommendations at this time. Ms. Wickland, do you have any updates from your work group?
Yes. I will be giving the work group 1 update for the state colleges, and Dr. Anglin will be giving the update for the community colleges. The work group is considering increasing the funding to the state colleges formula for the 22-23 biennium to $71.4 million, which is an increase of $6 million or 9.2% as compared to the 2021 biennium. Due to an average double-digit growth at the state colleges, the initial contact hour growth projection was updated to reflect this change. The change would include funding of $56.5 million to the state colleges instruction and administration formula for a $5.8 million increase. It would include funding of $6.7 million to the space support formula, which would be an increase of $200,000 to be split between utilities and operations and maintenance. It would also include funding of $7.9 million to the small institute supplement using the same methodology and rate as the 2021 biennium. This concludes my update for Charge 1 for the state colleges, and now I'll turn it over to Dr. Anglin.
The community college work group has looked at increasing the core to $1.5 million per biennium. This would be a $7 million increase. And as we continue our work, there will be more discussion on the core funding. On the success points, currently we're looking at recommending an increase to $215 per success point. and this would be an increase of $32.1 million based on current success point levels. And then contact hour increase to $557 per contact hour from $544, and that would be a $44.8 million increase. And then the BAT, flat from the previous biennium from biennium of 40.70, this would be a $0.5 million increase from $3.2 million to $3.7 million total dollars. It'd be a $40.70 flat rate. And then that would be a total increase in funding of $84.4 million from the current biennium. So that is where our work group is currently. Do we have any further discussion? If there's no additional discussion, we'll move to charge 2, which is study and make recommendations for the appropriate funding level for and the refinement of the Texas State Technical College System's return value funding formula. We have no recommendations at this time. Mr. Reeser, do you have a work group update?
I do. The work group has studied the return value funding formula and also carefully reviewed the preliminary data that was produced by the co-board staff. At this time, the committee will have no recommendations to amend any of the initial data nor any of the techniques used to arrive at them. And our final recommendation will be at the next meeting.
Thank you very much. Do we have any further discussion from the committee? There is none. We'll move to charge 3. Study and make recommendations on the efficacy of critical need fields as they relate to contact hour and success point funding. There are no recommendations at this time. Dr. McMillan, do you have any work group updates?
Yeah, the work group met and visited about critical fields, as well as the TAC Metrics Committee visited about critical fields. And there is a feeling that those need to have a refresher this time. And I believe the coordinating board is working on methodology to be able to bring that proposal to us. I know Julie had spent some time on that. One of the things that she's cautioned the work group on is that a refresher of that, which hasn't been done in many years, will likely lead to less fields in the critical field area. And then additionally, that we would need to decide how a field became a listed critical field. Did it need to be on that list for a number of years before it's on there? And then once it's on there, does it need to stay on there for a number of years? Because institutions clearly can't put a graduate out in 1 year many times if it shows up on that critical field list. So those are some items of discussion that will be taking place. Julie, would you like to add anything else to that in terms of the discussion and what progress is being made to this point? And I might add before she does that, this is a real big push for her and her team to be able to do this. So that we appreciate her and the team of the coordinating board's work on that.
Thank you very much. I guess the only thing I'll add is that we did spend a little time talking with Ms. Mariana Vega at the Texas Workforce Commission to just have them look at, there was a methodology that was developed 2 years ago for the Formula Advisory Committee, and you had decided to move forward at that time with leaving things as they were for the critical fields. But that's a methodology that we wanted some outside input on now that there are some possibly newer tools and newer information that could be used. So we did have a productive phone call, I think, regarding that. That was pretty positive about the methodology we had, and we talked about some pieces we might be able to add. So we plan to continue moving forward with that, and I believe we were going to try to also talk with folks at the Georgetown Center for Workforce and Education just to get their feedback so we could bring you back something that, you know, had a little bit of outside input.
So any feedback from the committee or this group on critical fields and where that's at?
Any comments, discussion on critical fields? Okay. There are none. We will move to charge 4, which is to evaluate the continued relevancy of each success point and its components given various state-level policy changes, the increased focus on fields of study, and the implementation of the co-requisite model in developmental education, and study and make recommendations for the appropriate number of points to be awarded for each metric. There are no recommendations at this time. Dr. McMillan, do you have any work group updates?
The work group met and visited about a number of things that happened last legislative session, including additions to success points. In fact, some of those coming out of the critical fields area, I believe 3 critical fields were added as eligible items for completion on success points, as well as the co-enrollment, new co-enrollment success point that's out there. So those were things that were talked about, and we understood how those impacted looking at the data the coordinating board provided. Additionally, the group talked about feedback that we'd received from community college presidents around the rider that's proposed for changing the current weight of transfer from 2 to 2.5, changing the current weight from credentials awarded from 2 to 1.2, and then changing the weight of critical field credentials awarded from 2.25 to 3.0. Generally, I would say the feedback was cautionary against devaluing the credential that community colleges provide, and that we would like to propose some alternatives to that in concert with the work of the TAC Metrics Task Force and all the community college presidents. That work is commencing. In fact, some of that work occurred before the last session, and because the timing of that didn't mesh with the session, they had several recommendations that came out of last session that I'll talk about in just a moment. But before I do, any additional feedback on the rider from this committee? Okay. So the Metrics Task Force in 2018 talked about a number of additional things for consideration, and those would be that we would give a success point not at completing 15 hours of credit, but completing 12 hours of credit, and that would be worth 1 point as it is currently, but moving the hours down to 12 instead of 15. I think that at the time was in line with the recommendation we had around dual credit and 12 hours of dual credit. The second one was around degrees, core completers, and certificates. We looked at academically disadvantaged and economically disadvantaged, and at the time came to a recommendation to recommend an additional half a point for an academically disadvantaged student who was able to complete a degree or certificate. That is something that is still actively being considered, but you'll hear about some additional considerations on that in a moment. So their recommendation prior was to add a half a point to those if you had academically disadvantaged students. In keeping in with the 12 hours, recognizing transfer students that had earned 12 hours as opposed to students that had earned 15 hours was something that work group had come out with, as well as a laying over that academically disadvantaged upon transfer, adding 1/2 of a point for those students that did that. So those were the recommendations that came out of the last task force. That group has met, and a subcommittee of this group has met and talked about those as potential. Those are not recommendations at this point, but those are potential and discussion items. And so those provide a marker for some of the dialogue that we're having currently. So any conversation around those recommendations or feedback from this group?
Just for clarification, the economically disadvantaged, or is it those who qualify for Pell? Our CFO is having questions.
Yeah, so in the recommendations from 2018, it was just academically disadvantaged, and so it's the students that didn't meet the TSI. However, you're on those work groups and we've talked, so you know that an emerging idea is to also add economically disadvantaged. That was not a part of the recommendation from the 2018 group, but there's been a reanalysis of that information, and the coordinating board's been gracious enough to provide us with the information. And so now we're thinking about a quarter of a point for academically disadvantaged and a quarter of a point for economically disadvantaged. And if you have both, those would add into a half a point. So as I understand the economically disadvantaged, there's a look back going past, over the past 10 years. And I believe that that's looking at whether they were Pell eligible. But I'm going to pause there and let Julie correct me if I'm incorrect on that.
No, that's correct. For economically disadvantaged, we look back 10 years for Pell eligible, which is our typical way to approach Pell eligibility, and when we define economically disadvantaged that way.
So that's how this has changed since the last time we visited from those dialogues, is adding that idea of economically disadvantaged. I think it's about 61% of the graduates had either academically or economically disadvantaged as a marker for their point. And so any discussion on the movement of the work group or movement of the TAC metrics task force?
Okay. If there's none, then we will move on to charge 6, which is study and make recommendations for the appropriate definition of a student in a structured co-enrollment program successfully completing at least 15 semester credit hours at the community college. There are no recommendations at this time on charge 6. Dr. McMillan, do you have any work group updates?
The work group did look at the recommendation provided by the coordinating board and found it to be acceptable. I think there are some minor changes that might occur. The idea is that a student who is in a program where there's an agreement between the institutions and they're co-enrolled at that time would be able to benefit. And that agreement, contract agreement, MOU, we're working on that particular word, which one we want to pick, that's on file with the coordinating board, then those would be eligible for consideration.
Okay, all right. Any further discussion? Okay. Then we'll move to charge 5, study and make recommendations for the appropriate methodology for including the second 8-week courses in the base period. There are no recommendations at this time. Dr. Wallace, do you have any updates from the work group?
I do. We've worked together and contacted several of our colleagues that are becoming more engaged. As you're familiar, there were 4 primary institutions involved in 8-week in the base period: Amarillo, Odessa, San Jacinto, Grayson. We've spoken to several others that are becoming involved in that, and we are going to be bringing recommendations at the next meeting. But at this point, we believe the study and the accuracy of the original methodology was fairly accurate, and we're probably going to see trying to stick to that with limited variability between what we piloted in the last session and this. So we will be bringing formal recommendations at our next meeting.
Thank you. Any discussion from the committee? Then if there are none, then item 4 is to plan for our subsequent meetings. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 6th at 10 a.m. Work group should begin finalizing the recommendations for final discussion and approval by the full committee. So I think we have quite a bit of work to do between now and November 6th. And item 5 is adjournment. If there are no further questions or points of discussion, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
A motion by Dr. Wallace, second by Dr.
Oh, that
That was
Richard,
Dr. Riza.
Dr. Riza. Okay, a motion by Dr. Riza.
no way I can prove I was, part of something.
Yeah, thank you. You are now a part of the meeting, Robert. The Community and Technical Colleges Formula Advisory Committee is adjourned until November 6, 2019 at 10 a.m. Thank you all.